and welcome to the panel discussion, Barriers in Education for Women and Girls in Arkansas. Today, the Clinton Foundation Health Matters Initiative, in partnership with the Women's Foundation of Arkansas and the Clinton School of Public Service, are pleased to host this panel discussion and release 3 reports that examine the impact of teen pregnancy and birth on education, the perceptions of the status of women, and the links between education of women and girls to Arkansas's economic future. Through our convening power and brokering of partnerships, the Clinton Foundation Health Matters Initiative works to improve the health and well-being of all people by activating individuals, communities, and organizations to make meaningful contributions to the health of others. These 3 reports and their recommendations align with our goals to help reduce the prevalence of preventable health outcomes, alleviate health inequities, disparities, and reduce healthcare costs by improving the access to key resources for all people. And more specifically, these reports provide recommendations that will move the needle on the bold actions outlined in the Central Arkansas Blueprint for Action around increasing the number of high school graduates and attending post-secondary and technical education, and would better prepare them for the workforce. These reports also close the disparities gap in economic achievement and having a real conversation around teen pregnancy, birth rates, and sex education. And what's even more exciting is that we're having a specific conversation about women and girls. To get started, we will have the authors, who are already on our stage, report briefly on the key findings, followed by our expert panelists who will provide a deeper analysis on the reports and the impact for our state. And after our panelists, we'll have a Q&A segment led by Lynette Watts, Executive Director of the Women's Foundation of Arkansas. Our authors today are Ms. Marisa Nelson, author of Voices of Women, Women's Perception of Women in Arkansas, Dr. Kristen Duskowski, and Mara D'Amico, author of Delivering a Better Education, Impact of Teen Pregnancy and Birth in Arkansas, and Dr. Jay Barth, author of Our Common Journey, Linking the Education of Women and Girls in Arkansas Economic Transformation. So if we could start right here with our far right here, or close to our right here, give a 1 to 2 minute synopsis of the key findings that you had in the preliminary report.
Thank you, Tiana. As she said, my project was The Voices of Women, Perceptions of the Status of Women in Arkansas. And my project was really done as a follow-up to the 1973-2013 Then and Now report on the status of women in Arkansas, published by the Women's Foundation last year. So what this report and a couple of other reports that came out around this time did was they described the status of women in Arkansas with numbers. So using quantitative data, they talked about women's employment, health, and involvement in politics. So what was really missing from the conversation was the voices of women themselves. That's where my project came in. I spoke with 7 groups of women across the state about their reactions to the 1973-2013 report and their perceptions of the status of women in Arkansas today. Now, what really stood out in the discussions is that women are not a monolithic group. What women want, need, and expect out of their educations, their careers, their families can vary widely. Women disagreed with those that they felt were outside of their social group. They disagreed with women they were in the groups with. And sometimes women would disagree with themselves in the things that they said. So I included 2 quotes to pique your interest into reading my report. And they're definitely opposing quotes so that you can see the spectrum of perspectives that I heard while I was having these conversations. So the first one was a young graduate student, and she said, their identity is in being a mom only. They've lost their ability to really do anything other than being a mom. The question is, what happens when those kids grow up? Or what kind of example is being set for them? Another woman, around the same age with a mother of 2, said, I once heard that no success can compensate for failure in the home. When you look at the generations that are coming after us and who's going to be our leaders, if they're in daycare, and I'm not trying to put down daycare or anything, but if they're not raised properly in the home, what are those leaders going to be like? So you can see how there's a real tension between these 2 perspectives, and I often heard a defensiveness of what other people thought, how people felt other people viewed them. But what most of the women I spoke with wanted was respect for the choice that they made. But the overriding sentiment overall was that in their end there has to be a choice. That it is difficult to impossible for a woman to focus on having a high-powered, lucrative career while maintaining a quote-unquote good home. So read my report for more.
Thank you.
So as we've just heard from Marisa, the women in the focus groups that she conducted commented on many things, but one of the most striking was how many cited having children early in life was one of the main reasons why they never went back to school or pursued higher education. These women didn't necessarily express regret for having children. It was more of a sense of wondering about what could have been. But it became very clear that there is a strong connection between teen pregnancy and birth and reduced educational and professional attainment in Arkansas.
And as you'll see from the report from Mara and I, we wanted to find the hard data to support these voices and these anecdotes that we were hearing in the earlier report from Marisa. So let's talk about the data for a second. Arkansas has the third highest teen pregnancy rate in the country. The teen pregnancy rate in Arkansas is 28% higher than the national average. And so why is that? Well, teens in Arkansas report higher rates of sexual activity and lower rates of reliable contraception use compared to teens nationally. These rates have an impact on educational attainment. Less than 2% of teen mothers will graduate college by age 30. Again, to be clear, less than 2% of teen mothers will graduate college by age 30. That's astounding. These high rates of teen pregnancy and low rates of educational attainment are impacting Arkansas economically. Teen childbearing costs the state of Arkansas $103 million in 2008. Teen parenthood is also a cycle that has negative economic outcomes for individuals and for the state. And these impacts are compounded in the long term, as children of teen mothers are more likely to experience teen pregnancy and teen childbirth as teens themselves.
So following up on those facts and figures, what can we do about it? Improved sexuality education and access to primary prevention can significantly reduce the rate of teen pregnancy in Arkansas. By improved sexuality education, we mean medically accurate and evidence-based education that emphasizes primary prevention to reducing teen pregnancy. Without a change in our system, we'll continue to rank in the bottom of the country for teen pregnancy, teen birth, STI transmission, and educational attainment. We must work together to provide girls in Arkansas with their best chances at education and for an economically sound future.
Great, good afternoon. Is this on? We good? All right. My co-author, Dr. Sarah Beth Estes of UALR, and I set out to unravel a puzzle in our report, Our Common Journey. And whether at the individual level or societal level across the globe, a strong correlation shows itself between educational attainment and economic betterment. But as we compare Arkansas women and men, that correlation is decidedly weaker. Arkansas's girls and young women outpace their male peers in many aspects of educational attainment. Their high school graduation rates are higher, their dropout rates are lower, and their performance on assessments of educational achievement outpace males by some of the largest gaps in the nation, especially in the early grades. Yet the economic performance of Arkansas's women lags dramatically. Indeed, the Index of Economic Status developed by the Institute of Women's Policy Research shows that Arkansas ranks 48th of the 50 states in terms of the economic status of women compared to men in the state. This report tries to get inside this disconnect between educational attainment and economic outcomes in Arkansas. First, the areas of educational attainment where girls and young women perform best are those areas that, while crucially important for life in the 21st century, are not skills that are increasingly necessary to thrive economically in this century. When it comes to the STEM subjects, STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, things get females' performance compares to males begins to disappear. The gap begins to disappear. And things get decidedly worse when we look beyond the state assessments to those things that gauge whether folks will thrive in college and beyond in STEM areas. For example, performance on advanced placement tests shows that males are outperforming females in Arkansas in every STEM area and are, in most cases, dramatically outpacing females in the taking of the test. And for example, 147 Arkansas male students took the computer science AP exam last year compared to only 26 females, almost over a 6-to-1 gap. Recent data released by the ACT reinforces the gender preparation gap in STEM fields as folks get ready to transition from high school to college. And even among young women who are interested in STEM fields, they are showing themselves not as well prepared for success in college in those areas. And those numbers are reflected in our report. But just as important as these STEM issues are the barriers that women continue to face in terms of completing post-high school degrees is also reinforced here. Whether it is child care issues, particularly pronounced for single parents, the need for high-quality after-school and summer programs, distinctive college financing challenges that women face, or the absence of mentoring, especially by female role models in higher education, and particularly in the STEM fields, these barriers are real. On all of these points, this report includes not just data, but the voices of real Arkansas women, captured by the students and faculty in the interdisciplinary PhD program in leadership studies at UCA. So females need a 21st century education, including access to STEM education, and the barriers to higher education have to be removed if the relationship between education and economics is to reassert itself for women here in Arkansas. And as the title of the report notes, we will all be winners economically as a state as women advance economically. And the voices of one of the women captured by the UCA group closes the report and I think captures this notion very well. She says, quote, "In education, you can't lose with girls. It's evident. The men in the house depend on the women. How are you going to leave them out of the picture when their own husbands and families depend on them so much? So do them a favor, do homage to the women who have gone before, and give it back to the young women who are coming up." Thanks.
Thank you. As we transition to the next phase of our segment, I would like to thank the authors for highlighting their important points, and we will definitely go into more detail with our panelists around education disparities, the perceptions of women, data, and teen pregnancy. I will ask the panelists to come up at this time, and as they do, I'm going to give you a couple of more pointers about another initiative within the Clinton Foundation that aligns directly with the conversation that we're having today. And that is the No Ceilings Project, full participation led by Secretary Hillary Clinton and Chelsea Clinton to advance the full participation of women and girls around the world. Full participation is the unfinished business of the 21st century and is critical to achieving prosperity, stability, and security across the globe. Towards this goal, the No Ceilings Project has partnered with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to collect data about the status of women and girls participation throughout the world. So we are asking today for you to take a survey, which you will receive electronically so that we can glean your thoughts and perceptions of women and girls. This data will be compiled and analyzed into a compelling, shareable, and publicly accessible progress report that will identify the progress that has been made and the gaps that remain. We definitely want the voice of Arkansans to be included, so we ask that you take the time to complete the electronic survey. Again, you'll receive it after this panel discussion, and we thank you in advance. Now, I think we're ready for our panel discussion. So I'm going to go forward and give an introduction of our facilitator as well as our panelists. Today we have facilitating with us Professor Cindy Nance, who serves as our panelist facilitator for this important discussion. Dr. Nance is the Dean Emeritus and Nathan G. Gordon Professor at the University of Arkansas School of Law. She joined the Arkansas faculty as the Assistant Professor in 1994 and served as the Dean of Law School from 2006 to 2011. Professor Nance is an expert in her field and has published many journals inclusive of the Iowa Law Review, Berkeley Journal of Employment, Labor Law, Rutgers Law Review, and the Brandeis Law Review. Professor Nance serves on the board of the National Association of Law Placement Foundation, is a member of the American Law Institute, and is a member of the International Women's Forum. Locally, Professor Nance is a member of the Arkansas Bar Association, its Labor and Employment Law section, and was appointed to the Arkansas Supreme Court to serve on the Arkansas Judges and Lawyers Assistance Committee. We also have on our panel today Dr. Kershell Nash. She is a medical director with the Arkansas Blue Cross and Blue Shield Medicare Advantage. Dr. Nash's background and work in public health research has been instrumental in developing viable programs and policies that have improved the health of underserved and minority populations. Dr. Nash has assisted in informing health policy decision makers across Arkansas through her work with the Arkansas Minority Health Commission, her work with the state legislature, the Department of Health, and other community-based organizations in public health issues facing the state of Arkansas. Dr. Nash received her medical degree from the University of Maryland at Baltimore School of Medicine, completed a residency in primary care, internal medicine at George Washington University Hospital, and received an MPH from the Harvard School of Public Health. We also have Dr. Nash is Ms. Alice Mahoney. She's the Vice President and co-founder of the El Dorado Education Foundation and a Governor Beebe appointed member of the Arkansas State Board of Education. In 2009, she received the Woman of the Year in Philanthropy Award from the Women's Foundation of Arkansas. She's a past chair of the board of El Dorado Chamber of Commerce. Alice served as the first chair in education for the Education Committee as well. She is a member of the board of directors for the Arkansas Business and Education Alliance, which is a parent organization of the Arkansas Scholars Program, and she is a member of the South Arkansas Community College Foundation Board. We also have with us Mr. Grant Tennille, who's a former Deputy Chief of Staff to Arkansas Governor Mike Beebe. He serves currently as the Executive Director of the Arkansas Economic Development Commission, and Grant has an extensive background in telecommunication and journalism. In his career, he has provided business and strategic counseling to companies of all sizes, from Fortune 500 corporations to small startups. Please welcome our panelists, and I will hand it over to our facilitator.
So I'd like to start with a thanks very much to the Women's Foundation of Arkansas and the Clinton School for inviting me to participate in this very important discussion, and very thrilled to see the number of people in the room, so I think you agree with me that it is indeed a very important topic. And thank you to the men who are here today, which is going to segue me into my first question, which is a pretty open one, and I think each one of the panelists may want to speak to this. And although these reports look at the state of women, why is this important either in healthcare, education, or economic development? Why is this not just a women's issue? Why is it important that we not categorize it that way?
Okay. Well, from the economic standpoint, quite simply, we can't grow our economy if we tell half of our people we're going to cut your Achilles tendon when you're in 8th grade and you're going to be running slower than everybody else for the rest of your life. The bottom line is, to grow Arkansas's economy, we need men and women performing and earning on an equal basis. And, you know, I've said some things publicly about this before, but a huge part of the solution to this problem has got to come from men. Women can't solve this whole problem by themselves. But in order to solve it, half of us are going to have to admit that there's a problem. And we're not there yet.
Thank you, Grant. Looking back over my 20 years with the El Dorado Education Foundation and the Arkansas State Board of Education, when we start talking about STEM careers, particularly why the girls aren't getting it, in Arkansas, we do not have to teach science until the 5th grade. You have to teach a lab in K through 4, but you don't have to teach science. With the next generation science standards coming along, that's going to change. If you've looked at any of the curriculum outline, that will start happening in kindergarten. Another thing I think that's really affected advances for women is Title IX, and we can talk about sports and we can talk about physical education. But one thing that happened when the military opened its ranks to women, they found out that women weren't team players because we had never had the opportunity to be team players. They also found out that we couldn't be leaders, and to be a leader, you have to be able to delegate. And that was one of the things that when we go back and look at all of our teachers and all of our superintendents who are out there trying to bring our girls up, we still have that team building problem. So I think that's something that needs to be looked at as well. When you start looking at economic development, those that are really successful, bring in that team that's going to help them be successful and delegate authority to them. And we haven't gotten to that point yet.
I agree with my colleagues here, and I think I'm just going to take a little bit of a turn and say it's not only a women's health issue because it's a community issue. Women make up half the population, a little bit over half, I think, here. But it's a community issue, and to address these things, it affects everyone in the community, number two. Number three, we need policy change around lots of these issues, and women aren't at the policy table to make some of these decisions, as we heard or we saw in some of the reports. And finally, if I just drill down specifically to health and teen pregnancy, for the most part, it still takes two. You know? So an intervention just for teen girls is half of an intervention.
That was awesome. Dr. Nash, I'm going to follow up with you then based on that. That was fantastic. I want to cite the report, page 6. I'm actually trying to encourage you all to read these reports, so I'm going to draw some of the data out of that. But I was actually astounded by some of the figures here, both in terms of the early age at which young ladies engage in sexual activities, the number of times they engage in it, the number of partners they have, and just wanted to ask you if you found any of that information startling at all in the first place. And then I know we have some suggestions about what to do about that, but just wondering why you think that's so.
You know, I was startled by that reaction too, and I think part of it, I've said to several people, I think I've become my parents as I've gotten older, which is a good thing, I think. But, you know, times have changed, and the level of sexual activity and initiation was shocking in the data. But it's understandable. If you look at all of the influences and all the pressures in the media that we see out there, if that's the only message you're getting, that's not surprising. So my point is that there are a lot of different factors that impact upon that sexual initiation, and it's not just an individual choice of a person. You know, it's the context in which you live. There's research out there that shows that neighborhood factors are also important. If you live in low-income communities, if you live in communities where there's social disorganization, there's no family support, there are not economic or social opportunities for kids, then you have increased initiation rates, including in rural areas. So it's a complex picture that includes the social and the physical environment. But those numbers were really shocking.
Maybe the reason I wasn't shocked is that I have a 19-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 9-year-old. And so I've got a front row seat to some of what's going on out here in the world. And the 11-year-old and the 9-year-old are both girls, and we'll get to that in a little bit. The one reason that I think these reports are so important is, and you can say this about so many things these days, we got to get to a set of facts that we all say, well, those are the facts. And the reports all do a very good job of giving us an unvarnished picture of what reality out there looks like right now. And the one thing I will say about the initiation age and the time and all that kind of stuff, I feel like we would do well to remember that if you rolled the clock back 200, 250 years, the number I'm betting would start looking a lot closer to the numbers that we have now. And the reality is that a lot of the answer to that question is that childhood is a second half of the 20th century American invention. We're the ones who said, there's a point in your life where you're going to be a child. And we've done all kinds of things to lengthen that period of time. And so one of my greatest frustrations at all of the conversations about women's reproductive health is that half of the audience having this argument wants, I think, best I can tell, to deny biological imperatives and reality. And until we all commit to sitting and looking at the numbers and saying, you can tell young women not to have sex until you're blue in the face. Some significant portion of them.
Did you say young women and young men?
But you're right. You can tell young women and young men not to have sex until you're blue in the face, and you're going to fail. And you're going to fail forever. And the sooner that we can all just start looking at the facts as the facts and not confusing them with religious ideas about what should happen, the quicker we're going to get to actually talking about what real solutions look like. And that's not to say that any religion that anybody ascribes or subscribes to that says, you know, you shouldn't have sex until you're married, great. Your parents and your pastor and your grandparents and your teachers and all of these people are here to help support you through that journey. But at the same time, let's realize that not everybody on the planet subscribes to that. And we've got to do something for those people. And we've also got to recognize that at some point, young women and men start to make their own choices, regardless of what their pastor or their parents or their grandparents are telling them. And we've got to give them access to the same kinds of education and services that we give everybody else.
Yeah, Dr. Nash, I didn't know if you were going to jump in. I saw you lean forward.
You know, Arkansas has started this past year a series in areas around the state, school-based health clinics. I don't know if you all have one in your area, but El Dorado got one this past year. So I made the calls. I said, do we dispense condoms? No. Do we dispense hormonal contraceptives? No. So here we have something that no one is basically willing to touch in our school system, even though we have the clinic. The other thing that's out there, and I don't know if you young people in the front, in order to see a film about reproduction in your health education class, it's shown one time, and there has to be a signed letter of consent from your parent for you to be able to see that particular film. Now, as Mr. Tennell is telling us, you've already seen it on TV, but for us in education to deliver that material to you, we have to have parental consent. So it does make a difference in what you're getting in the school system.
That is a perfect segue. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you. I think this is going to draw you both in to the next question, which has to do with a national poll that suggested that 93% of parents of 7th and 8th graders and 91% of parents of 9th through 12th graders thought that it was important to have sex ed included in the school curriculum. It seems to me from our report, and now I want to draw you to the Delivering Better Education report, beginning page 19, that there may not be quite an agreement on what that means. And so I'd like our panelists to speak to that as well. That is the issue about sort of what should be a part of any curriculum, when it should be introduced, and some of the better practices we know.
Well, you know, I'll just make a general statement to begin. My takeaway from this report is that the evidence is clear out there with us that abstinence-only education, just don't do it, or just say no, is what makes me think about, doesn't work. So in the reality, we have a moral ideal that may be different for different people. I get that. But we have to deal with reality. And this report tells me that our reality is that abstinence only does not work. Comprehensive sex education does. I mean, my mentor talked about that, Dr. Jocelyn Elders, for a very long time. And I agree with
And she got real pushback.
And she got real pushback.
For using real words, parts of the
Exactly.
anatomy.
Exactly. So I think the principles that come out in this report are critically important. And then I had an issue or a concern about whenever we hear about controversy about sex education, the loudest voices are the people that say no, not the people who support. So that's one of our issues. But we know what works. We need to do what works.
I think just to follow up, and we do teach reproduction and biology and all those other classes that you get, but you don't get that in the male-female reproduction cycle. So I think that needs to be moved down some as well, because you're getting that particular film in junior high. And so I think when you're getting all out there and talking to your friends, you're getting a lot of misinformation, and we need to be doing a better job in our school system of delivering that information to you.
Dr. Barth and I were talking before the beginning of this, and I made a comment to him that I think probably fits right here. If we at AEDC had commissioned Jay and UALR to do a study for us on why we're not attracting industrial jobs as quickly as the states around us. And lo and behold, Jay came back to us and said, you're not going to believe this, but it's due to a vitamin D deficiency in our workforce. Our people just aren't as strong as the people around us, and therefore they're getting the jobs. There would be a program implemented tomorrow to put vitamin D in the water to make us strong enough to compete. It wouldn't be an issue. Nobody would show up and say, God, I think that's a terrible idea. Everybody would say, great, vitamin D for everybody. We've got the exact same problem, and we want to continue to argue about things that aren't the solution to the problem. Period, end of story.
One of the themes that comes through two of the reports is the impact of teen pregnancy, both on the health of the mother, on the children. There are economic impacts and educational impacts. And so I'm just going to open it up to the panel to talk about the need to bring down the rate, although we've seen a decline, not as sharply as nationally, and talk about some of the impacts and some of your thoughts about what we might do policy-wise to address those impacts.
First, let me say I really enjoyed, or was informed and enjoyed the combination of these three reports and the work that has been done, because it illustrates the complexity of this problem. It illustrates the reason why we all need to be here in this room across sectors, across individual areas of expertise to address this problem, because I wish it were as simple as putting a pill in the water.
Right.
You know, if it were that simple, I agree. But one of the problems is that it's so complex. And what it's about, for me, is what I call social determinants of health for women. So what we've talked about, essentially, is that teen pregnancy leads to decreased education, right? And then decreased economic potential. But we have a society where women aren't paid the same anyway. Okay, and we won't let you have education about sex, okay? We're not gonna give you birth control, but we're gonna tell you no. Don't do it. So I think that the other powerful thing about these reports is that it brings to light some interventions. The interventions of comprehensive sex education, of supporting families to talk about this too, not just the school, right? But I would even move further upstream into some of those other social determinants. What's going on in your neighborhood? What are the opportunities for these young people sitting in the front row here that gives them a different focus, a different outlet? Because their brains are still developing. They may not think so, but it is. And all these things are tied together. And so the interventions, while I agree are comprehensive sex education, access to contraception, and preferably long-term, how many of us remember to take a pill every day? Literally, adults in the room. How can we expect 14 and 15-year-old children to do the same thing? So, I think the answers are complex and that this report shows that complexity, and those are just some of the issues that came up for me.
And one of the things that we've looked at is the poverty rate and the teenage pregnancy rate. If your parent doesn't have above a 9th grade education, there is probably like a 99% possibility that that's where you're going to be. You're not going to get up into those higher levels in taking those challenging courses in high school. Working with Bridge College Algebra, Mathematics Camp, GLAMS, if you get children out there to see what they can accomplish and to see that they can accomplish that through education, I went back and when we got the numbers on the teenage pregnancy rate, I looked at the numbers in 2009, and would you believe Arkansas has improved significantly,
Yes.
which was kind of alarming but good, because in my particular area, the rate had gone down 6.1 points out of that 1,000. So education is helping, but we need a lot of people working together to make a bigger impact on what we're getting out to our young people.
The other thing that occurred to me as I was making my way through all three reports is the issue of the economic health of women. And part of the reason this is so complex is that this is affecting every woman in the state of Arkansas in one way or another. I mean, from at every level of the economic spectrum, these issues have real impact on the lives of women, their children, and families in Arkansas. The issues may be slightly different, but when you talk about increasing the overall economic output of women in this state, which is really what we ought to all be about in the final analysis, we've got a huge range of issues that we have to focus on, from teen pregnancy, from, performance in middle school among women in STEM subjects, through childcare, secondary education, and then, I look around this room and I know that there are a number of highly successful, well-paid women sitting here among us, and every single one of them may be the envy of every other woman in this room, but they'll still tell you they're drowning. I mean, I'm married to a woman who owns her own business, is the mother of 3, and it's killing her to pull both of those things off. And a huge part of the problem, and I said it a few months ago at a panel next door, you want to solve the problem? Men have got to lean in. Let's stop pointing the finger at women and saying, or worse, you guys got to stop telling one another to lean in, and you got to get focused on us. We've got to lean in. It's the only answer that's going to solve this problem for everybody. And it goes all the way back to the subtle reminder, or not so subtle reminder, that I didn't include young men in the same statement about responsibility on this stuff. It's got to start there. We've got to start telling boys in the 3rd grade, you bear equal responsibility for this, so it's just as much your responsibility to make sure it doesn't happen as it is the girls. I mean, we got to 200 pages worth of report here, we know what the answers are. We just do. We do. We know what the answers are. It's a question of building the momentum to get those questions resolved. And a lot of it's political. I mean, here's the thing, and I think everybody in the room knows which side of the political spectrum I fall on, but we're getting ready to have an election in a week. And right now, the numbers are telling us, and some of the numbers are numbers that Dr. Barth has helped to collect, that there isn't as much of a spread among women voters between our Republican candidates and our Democratic candidates in this state as we should expect there to be. And I think a lot of it is lack of education about the issues, and I think a whole lot of it is women have essentially given up. I mean, it's you got. Well, I don't know if you've given up, but then go vote and go vote your own interest. Don't go vote somebody else's interest or what they've told you their interest is. Figure out where the candidates stand on the issues that you care about and go vote. That's the only way you're ever going to get enough people into political positions to begin to have honest conversations about all of these issues.
Let me just second that and say that there is no reason why women's health issues should be discussed and there's no woman at the policy table about these decisions. And reproductive health is a major issue. It's not, I mean, women's health is an issue. We don't sanction men's health in the way that we are attempting to do women's health. So I think if you believe that, whatever your beliefs are, we have to take a policy stand, not only by voting, but being at the table when these discussions are happening. And, and policy is a big P, okay, what happens at the State House, but it's also a little p what happens in your organizations, in your schools, young people. You can have an impact on what happens with a group of people right there, right in your town.
Well, I want to segue on both of those, and I know I only have a few minutes, but I really want to. There's so much good material here, and I've got so many questions. But following up on that, I want to talk to you about how women are empowered in the workplace. It's very interesting in the report that focuses on the women's voices. So I was so surprised you see over and over again that women were underpaid. There's also the issue about whether you can have work-life balance, and I'm actually blogging about that, and I've come to work-life integration. I'm not sure that they're always balanced because I think you're going to have different priorities. And related to that then is being a voice at the table. Another strain in that report is why women don't run for office, so they are policymakers. So I think I've given you enough there for our last question before we open it up to the audience and just ask you to weigh in on those.
Wow, let me just, my beginning statement is that I don't have any balance. Okay. When I was, when I think about the people in the Voices report, and the report acknowledges this, and I thank them for this, that this was a group of women who were very privileged, who tended to be upper income, had education, secondary educations and things like that. And it may be a very different experience for someone who is of color or someone who is lower income. But for me personally, there has always been that struggle, and I resented the fact of having to choose between a family and choose between my career. But because of the way we're structured, that's the decision that some of us have had to make. But it doesn't have to be that way. Your wife is working hard. She's Superwoman, and there's a culture for women that we have to do it all.
Yes.
Give 100% everywhere, which is 300 or 400% overall.
Which has health implications, by the way, for women.
Exactly, and particularly women of color. There are studies out there that show that chronic stress, okay, that chronic stress of everyday life wears on the body. right? Whereas on the cardiovascular system. And then women have increased risk of heart attacks and strokes, and then when we show up, we don't get quality care. So it's a vicious circle, but the pressures on women are there, and they are real, no matter where you are on the spectrum, on the economic spectrum, but I think they're intensified on the lower end of the spectrum.
Thank you. You know, we perpetuate that starting in kindergarten in our public schools. We already are making a difference in girls and boys. One of the wonderful things that I get to do is work with our chairs and our literacy chair, who has been in our schools for a little over 20 years. When we started doing single gender classes, what we found out was the reading material was so different for the boys' class than it was for the girls' class. Boys wanted to read nonfiction material. They wanted technical manuals. They wanted gaming manuals. The girls wanted fiction. They wanted fiction. They picked their books from the fiction side of the list. So already we were seeing a big difference as in what we were studying. And then we were telling girls, oh, maybe that's vitamin D we still need. Well, you know, you're not real strong in math, so maybe we need to do something different to put you in a different class. So what we've seen from the beginning is we've made a difference in the girls and the boys' education, which needs to change. And when I started looking at such a difference in the reading material, I'm going, we've got to go back to kindergarten and change this, because we all ought to be reading technical and nonfiction rather than fiction pieces. So a lot of things that I see, in particular, we talked about AP. What's made a difference in all of those children going into AP classes is we had a little over 600 kids in El Dorado and East Hill. Y'all did great on those. That took calculus AB, physics BC, and made 3, 4s, and 5s. And so you're seeing a big tendency for those girls to go into those more challenging classes, but that's got to start at a lower level where we're funneling them up. And I think when you see that growing, I think that's going to make a difference in not only the health issues, but what we do fathering education.
Everybody's telling me to keep it short, so I'll address the last part real quick. I don't know these days what motivates anybody to run for public office. I think the whole thing is such a nightmare that no matter what sex you are, you sort of look at it and say, why would I ever want to go down there? But the truth of the matter is we've got to have more women at the table. Period, end of story. When the public health committees in both houses are majority male on the committee, and in the last couple of cycles, other than private option, the only other thing the Public Health Committee's been talking about is reproductive medicine, period. I mean, it's been sort of the same rerun over and over again. We need more women in the legislature. We need women in governors' mansions. We need more women in Congress. And, it isn't going to hurt us at all to have a female president either.
Okay, I think we need to do a panel discussion part 2, so we'll just have to schedule this because I know we didn't get to half of Cindy's questions, and I know we wanted to leave all of you time as well. I'm going to ask our authors to come back up here in case you have a question that you want to direct to one of them. Cindy, thank you for facilitating this, and great discussion. Y'all aren't going anywhere. You're going to get asked questions. At the Women's Foundation, our key goal in everything we do is economic security for our state's women, and we see their education as the key strategy to get them there and to ensure that they have economic security. So putting together these reports, and as Grant mentioned, putting the numbers out there, we hope that everyone, community leaders, decision makers, service providers to women, other nonprofits, anyone that deals with anything that has to do with women's issues, they have the numbers and they have the facts in front of them, and we can all make intelligent decisions based on what we know. So thank you for that. I do have to give a big thank you to our Policy and Research Committee, who backs up all of our authors, and they're actually on the committee as well, so thank you. So, let's have a few questions, and we'll start with you. Right here, we'll go with you, and then back here, and then over there.
Thank you all very much. This is important stuff. As I listened to the end of the conversation, it occurred to me that this is a couple of biases, and I'll let you all riff on this after I sort of. One is that this. I know that the future of all of our economic future. The truth is that STEM is like everything, right? I'm not sure I agree with that. Epistemologically, that is how we structure knowledge in schools. That is the false construct of fiction versus nonfiction. Right? I think it's a false construct. I think you can learn a lot of technical stuff from fiction. So that means, so what I'm getting at here is as I look at a political scientist and other people who are deeply into this, it strikes me that, and Grant, you mentioned this too, that we're really talking about the lack of civic imagination, a lack of understanding that schools are about perpetuating, nurturing, sustaining democratic life, not just economic life. Now, that might mean that what we have to do is restructure our economic discourse to create that kind of equity. So one of the things I worry about, I work just down the hall from the folks at the Encyclopedia of Arkansas, and they remind me daily of the anti-intellectualism that is so much a part of our unfortunate history. And it strikes me that what we're really talking about is the need to ramp up our civic and citizen engagement even more before we can even get to the possibility that women might find valuable roles in STEM. So, civic imagination, history of anti-intellectualism, and sexism, deep sexism in Arkansas. How does that impact
answer
us?
for you.
But, and we were really careful in our report to note that, of course, you know, literacy is enormously important in terms of reading's importance in learning at all levels. The importance of civics and self-governance is crucially important. That hadn't gone away. But I think we would be naive if we didn't note that there is some value in terms of 21st century living that emanates out of high-quality STEM education. And when you, yeah, I mean, not only some of the most important public policy issues of our time, but in terms of basic, sheer dollars and cents, you know, those are where some of the highest paying jobs are. And I think if we are going to think about closing some of these gaps, of course, STEM has to be part of the story. Should every woman be involved in STEM jobs? No. But not every man should be involved in STEM jobs, but everybody should have access to those same kinds of jobs if everybody's going to be on an equal playing field. And I think that is a challenge.
And I would just add, but to your point, when we have analyzed this whole complex weave of issues, the only way we're going to intervene on them is policy change, social change. How do we do that? How do we harness the energy of young people, hear their voices, like we heard the voices of women in the other report? I would like to hear from young people, but that's a part of that engagement. Make your voice heard, and then what do you do with it?
Let's go to you.
Thank you all for the reports, and I'm excited about reading really all the data in each of these. But Marissa, this is first about your perception, your report specifically. And you talked about that you would interview women and you'd hear one thing and then you would hear completely opposing story to the same question. And I guess that's the great divide. And how do we move the conversation in between? If we want people to accept what their true reality is, how can we move to this great divide? I think we see that in the difference of women across our state. You know, there's some who want to have these role models for girls, and some we don't need it. But how do we get there? Did you come up with that? Some recommendations from the study that you did?
Excuse me. The one thing I really got out of it was this idea of special treatment. So that's kind of the duality I saw, was that women didn't want special treatment like special leave policies or things like that. But really, in the same time, they didn't see that they were discriminated against in any way. But the structures we have are discriminatory because they make it difficult for women to work. So those two things it's like they recognized that they needed more flexibility and more things like this, but they didn't want the special treatment. So for me, it's really talking about those policy issues as just human issues, just as people issues. Men want to be at the soccer games too. Like, men want to go to PTA conferences too. Like he said, men need to lean in. They need those leave policies as well. And if we keep discussing those as women's issues and as women's things, and women need this time to be with their children, and women need this, it's never going to happen. We've seen that. It's not happening because that's the rhetoric. If we start talking about it as men and women all, like the family needs these policies, then maybe things will start moving.
Okay, right here, and then Lily, you're after here.
If I could just add one thing to the back of that, and that is that I am never one usually to say that a top-down solution is a way to move the needle. But I actually think in this case, if we start solving the problem at the 1% level, that it may be the only time I can think of where you'll hear the word trickle down come out of my mouth. But I really think it would have a tremendous impact overall if, you know, working women in positions of power could begin to get these things right. Then it's gonna flow down. And, you know, we've got, as I said earlier, a continuum of problems here that are all the same problem, but they affect people differently. But the truth of the matter is that although I may want to go to the soccer games and the parent-teacher conferences and the doctor's appointments, I'm not expected to go. When I don't show up at any of those things, it's sort of like, well, yeah, he's not here. And if we could just stop that, you know, I said a few months ago when I spoke on this subject that, you know, if you want to solve the wage disparity problem, do what Norway's done. And that's to make maternity leave mandatory for both sexes. It's going to solve your problem.
Incredibly important reports, wonderful panel discussion. I wanted to comment on, we've joked a little bit about both teen girls and boys. However, they're kind of ignoring the new data that is out there that says that almost 40% of teenage girls' pregnancies, the partner is not a teen, it's an adult male. So my question is, how do we have a holistic education, sex education curriculum that empowers our young women to say no to predatory males?
Go, Kristen.
You know, I think that's a great question and a great point. And I think what we sometimes forget with sexuality and gender issues is the issue of power within relationships. And I'm not saying that every relationship with teens or in general is coercive or there's a power imbalance. Oh, sorry. But I do think that that's important to acknowledge, and that you do have a power issue in these situations. I think that this is a cultural issue. And when we start placing women's value on their sexuality and on their appearance, and we have a image of a woman who is a woman that we see as a role model who achieved that status through sexuality and through appearance, it's no wonder that women are trying to achieve relationships maybe in power imbalance ways and trying to achieve success through what they see as the only means possible, which is through sexuality and appearance. And we start valuing leadership in women and characteristics in women that are more comprehensive. That's when I think you'll see a shift. But when you have, and you know, I mean no offense, but when you have someone like Kim Kardashian being the role model for women instead of someone like Hillary Clinton, that's problematic. And when you have media criticizing Hillary Clinton at every standpoint for her scholastic achievements, and you have people criticizing or critiquing Kim Kardashian for her attractiveness, and we see women gravitating more toward Kim Kardashian, that's a real big problem within our culture.
Okay, we're going to have one more question, and I'd point it over here. And everybody will be here post this, so grab them and ask your questions one-on-one, and y'all be prepared to line up. But we'll take one more question, and then I'm going to wrap it up.
Well, I hate to be the last one. I found the teenage pregnancy report possibly the most depressing report I have read in many, many years, essentially because I wrote this report 30-some-odd years ago. I wrote it again 20-some-odd years ago when I headed 2 teen pregnancy task force, one for President Clinton and one for Joycelyn Elders. Essentially, it was like reading my own material. The conclusions are the same. The rates have gone down, but the rates have gone down in the United States. So what we're doing in Arkansas hasn't brought the rates down particularly. My problem is we all know what to do. What we need is a group perhaps formed from here. How do we do it? I remember there was a thing called Hope is Not a Method that I used as a trigger film for contraceptive rap sessions for teenagers. And for years I thought it was a great title, and then I realized it's a terrible title. Hope is the method. And that's why I'm so pleased to see these reports tied together. It isn't just teen pregnancy. It's poverty, it's education, they all intertwine. You can't address one without the other, and the question is how. And anybody want to respond to how?
I don't know if I can answer that question, but you made some excellent points, and I remember having that conversation with you when we had a first draft of the report, and you said, I wrote this report. I've written this report many times, so it's very clear that what we've been doing to prevent teen pregnancy and teen birth in Arkansas is not working. And I don't know that everyone agrees on what we should do. I think that's where the real problem lies, is that we've presented suggestions and recommendations, and I think there is a lot of agreement about what should happen. But I think, as we mentioned before, the people who are opposed tend to be the loudest. Who's opposing?
Well, there
you have a vocal minority, and be clear, it is a minority. The one thing that's, I think, really surprising about, Mara and I talked about we talked about comprehensive sexuality education, and let's be clear, people think this is a controversial issue. It is not a controversial issue. The general public wants sexuality taught, and they want comprehensive sexuality taught. Parents do, and teachers do. And it's a vocal minority who is swaying policy. It's not about parents not wanting their kids taught sex ed. Most parents want their children taught comprehensive, medically accurate, evidence-based sexuality education.
So we'll let you do the research and come back and share that with us.
I mean,
so thank
okay.
you.
But
okay.
I can tell you that come next Tuesday, we're going to elect some people who are against this stuff.
True. So I'll be remiss if I didn't thank everybody that had a part in this. I've already mentioned the Policy and Research Committee, the Clinton Health Matters Initiative. This was a no-brainer for us to step out and be a part of their blueprint for action to build healthier communities, because we do think education of our state's women is the fastest way to fix a lot of the problems that are out there for us. I also have to lift up UCA's PhD in leadership. Emily Jordan Cox specifically, and Dr. Margaret Ellaby, who reviewed a couple of the reports, and then also Drake Oakley from UALR, who has helped us in doing some of our research as well. And the Clinton School, thank you for this wonderful forum to have this discussion, and I think you can see that this is a topic that could go on and on and on, so maybe let's do it again. So thank you for coming.